This is the 2019 AP English Language and Composition FRQ Synergy question. We are, of course, given 40 minutes and an additional 15 minutes for the reading, annotation, and planning of our essay response. Looking at the synergy breakdown, remember that this first part is always going to be your context. This will be your task, and this is going to be practically the same wording each time of specifying how your argument should be, the focus of your essay, and the sources should be used to support your argument. So let's go ahead and look through. In response to our society's increasing demand for energy, large-scale wind power has drawn attention from governments and consumers as a potential alternative to traditional materials that fuel our power grids, such as coal, oil, natural gas, water, or even newer sources such as nuclear or solar power. Yet the establishment of large-scale commercial-grade wind farms is often the subject of controversy for a variety of reasons. Okay, so we know that it's going to be controversy. We know that it's going to replace some of the typical sources that we've had. Carefully read the following 6 sources, including the introductory information for each source. Then synthesize material from at least 3 of the sources and incorporate it into a coherent, well-written essay in which you develop your position on the most important factors that an individual or agency should consider when deciding whether to establish a wind farm. Okay. So we've got our task, the most important factors that an individual or agency should consider when deciding whether to establish a wind farm. So whether is a key word here. Should we do it or not? Wind farm, yes or no? And what factors would play into whether or not we build? Okay, so in thinking of what factors we might need to consider when deciding whether or not we build a wind farm, let's just get some off the top of our head. Maybe cost, maybe location, maybe reception, right? Would people in neighboring areas or corporations be willing to go ahead and build a wind farm? Cost, location, reception. We'll see what else comes up as well. It could be, just off the top of my head before we really get into the sources, maybe that some of the big corporations that back companies that are into coal, oil, natural gas, etc., might cause problems in trying to establish wind farms. So we'll see. The argument should be the focus of your essay. We know that we're going to need both direct and indirect evidence, and we know that we are going to cite this way, source A, source C. It's a waste of our precious time to worry about the last names and attributing that in our source, okay? Now, I've already kind of outlined some of my ideas as to what we should consider when deciding whether or not to establish a wind farm. That's a little bit different than some of our previous synthesis essay prompts where we've had a clearer idea of do we agree, do we disagree, because we have to read the sources to see what other factors are there that we're not thinking of, okay? So just as my kind of pre-thinking, my idea going into the sources, we should consider cost, location, reception. That's what I'm dealing with for now. Let's go through our sources and see if that changes. Our first source is a picture. It says the photograph was taken for the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, okay? This shows a few different things. First, it's going to show how widespread wind farming is. It doesn't just take up a little bit of space, it takes up a lot of space, okay? So it's widespread. But the other thing that we notice is that the location appears to be remote. We don't see a big city anywhere back here. So maybe it won't have an immediate impact on local communities, okay? All right, source B is taken from a popular website dedicated to explaining various processes, and this is going to be how wind power works. On a global scale, wind turbines are currently generating about as much electricity as 8 large nuclear power plants. That includes not only utility scale turbines, but also small turbines generating electricity for individual homes or businesses, sometimes used in conjunction with photovoltaic solar energy. A small 10 kilowatt capacity turbine can generate up to 16,000 kilowatts per hour, and a typical US household consumes about 10,000 kilowatts in a year. Okay, so 16,000 per year versus the 10,000 per year that a single household consumes. Okay, so this first part here, we're looking at the capacity of generating electricity, okay? A typical large wind turbine can generate up to 1.8 megawatts of electricity, or 5.2 million kilowatts annually under ideal conditions, enough to power nearly 600 households. Still, nuclear and coal power plants can produce electricity cheaper than wind turbines can. So let's go ahead and underline this part. And we're going to circle the word cheaper. So here, wind turbines currently generating about as much as 8 large nuclear power plants. So we're really looking at, oh, wind turbines, awesome. Oh, wait a minute, maybe it's not as cost efficient as some of the other ideas. So why use wind energy? The two biggest reasons for using wind to generate electricity are the most obvious ones. Wind power is clean and it's renewable. It doesn't release harmful gases like CO2 and nitrogen oxides into the atmosphere the way coal does, and we are in no danger of running out of wind anytime soon. There is also the independence associated with wind energy, as any country can generate it at home with no foreign support. So that's another thing to consider. And a wind turbine can bring electricity to remote areas not served by the central power grid. Let's go ahead and bring electricity to remote areas. So down here we have more benefits of wind power. But there are downsides too. Wind turbines can't always run at 100% power like many other types of power plants, since wind speeds fluctuate. Wind turbines can be noisy if you live close to a wind plant. They can be hazardous to birds and bats. And in hard-packed desert areas, there is a risk of land erosion if you dig up the ground to install turbines. So we're back to a whole bunch of negative things: noisy, hazardous to birds and bats, and risk of land erosion. Also, since wind is a relatively unreliable source of energy, operators of wind power plants have to back up the system with a small amount of reliable, non-renewable energy for times when wind speeds die down. Some argue that the use of unclean energy to support the production of clean energy cancels out the benefits, but the wind industry claims that the amount of unclean energy that's necessary to maintain a steady supply of electricity in a wind system is far too small to defeat the benefits of generating wind power. Potential disadvantages aside, the United States has a good number of wind turbines installed, totaling more than 9,000 megawatts of generating capacity in 2006. That capacity generates in the area of 25 billion kilowatts of electricity, which sounds like a lot, but is actually less than 1% of the power generated in the country each year. As of 2005, US electricity generation breaks down like this: coal 52%, nuclear 20%, natural gas 16%, hydropower 7%, other including wind, biomass, geothermal, and solar 5%. The current total electricity generation in the United States is in the area of 3.6 trillion kilowatts every year. Wind has the potential to generate far more than 1% of that electricity. So a few things here. It has the potential to generate more than what it's doing right now, but clearly we have a very detailed breakdown of some of the advantages and disadvantages. Now, why did I circle or underline some of the things that I did? Well, certainly let me switch colors just to clarify. In this paragraph here, with land erosion, noisy if you live too close, hazardous to birds and bats, I'm going to put and add to my annotation, location issues, because this is actually going to reinforce my synthesis if I say that one of the things that we need to consider if we're going to build a wind plant is where we put it, because we're not going to want to disturb communities by being noisy. We're not going to want to be a hazard to the natural fauna, and we're certainly not going to want to have a risk of land erosion. Okay, so these might be some of the things that I consider. Other things that I might consider: potential to generate. All right, actually less than 1% of the power generated, and it's going to be worth it. Okay, is it, or wind power, if you want to be specific, is it worth it to do all of this if you're generating less than 1% of the overall electricity generated in the country each year? So some things that we're going to put here, we're going to do plus minus, and what I'd like to add would be clean / safe, and then efficiency, question mark, question mark, question mark, worth the cost. So there we have at the very top our altogether paraphrase, because again, if you have a little something at the top of each source to help you recognize, oh yeah, that's what that one was about, it might help you determine what sources you draw on as you write your synthesis. Okay, moving on. Source C, it's taken from an article in a peer-reviewed journal published by a federally funded research institute. The numbered notes refer to source information that has been omitted from this excerpt for length, so you're not going to be able to check the sources, okay? If we look at the title, Wind Turbines, a Different Breed of Noise, it's from something called Environmental Health Perspectives, definitely a government group. Large-scale wind turbines are a relatively recent innovation, so the body of peer-reviewed research addressing the potential impacts of their unique brand of sound is sparse and particularly unsettled. Anecdotal evidence strongly suggests a connection between turbines and a constellation of symptoms, including nausea, vertigo, blurred vision, unsteady movement, and difficulty reading, remembering, and thinking. Yikes. So here we'll just put wind turbine equal negative health. The polarizing issue of wind turbine noise is often framed one of two ways. Turbines are either harmless or they tend to have powerfully adverse effects, especially for sensitive individuals. According to Jim Cummings, executive director of the nonprofit Acoustic Ecology Institute in Santa Fe, New Mexico, most of the reports to date that have concluded turbines are harmless examined direct effects of sound on people and tended to discount indirect effects moderated by annoyance, sleep disruption, and associated stress. But research that considered indirect pathways has yielded evidence strongly suggesting the potential for harm. Let's go ahead and circle this because that might be something we quote. Multiple recent studies, including one co-authored by Daniel Shepherd, senior lecturer at New Zealand's Auckland University of Technology, have demonstrated that sleep interference gets worse the nearer residents are to turbines. Sleep is absolutely vital for an organism, he says. When we lose a night's sleep, we become dysfunctional. The brain is an important organ, and if noise is disturbing its function, then that is a direct health effect. In another recent study, Shepherd made a case for approaching the debate from a social or humanistic standpoint, taking perceived effects seriously even if the potential mechanisms through which they occur remain unclear. Many reasons exist for taking this approach with wind turbine noise, he wrote. First is that turbine noise, that is, the aerodynamic noise produced by air moving around the spinning blades as opposed to any mechanical noise from the motor itself, is often deemed more annoying than the hum or roar of transportation noise because of its repetitive nature and high variability in both level and quality, from swoosh to thump to silence, all modulated by wind speed and direction. This pulsing, uneven quality enables the noise to repeatedly capture the attention and become more difficult to ignore. So something that we could argue here, if this is something that we decided to use in our essay response, is that you can't moderate the noise because of its variability. So let's go ahead and circle that, okay? Or that's not really a circle. That's why I do a little box instead. In addition, unlike vehicle traffic, which tends to get quieter after dark, turbines can sound louder overnight. As Cummings explains, often at night, wind shear sets in. This creates conditions with moderate winds at hub height and a sharp boundary layer below, which winds are much lower or even near still. The absolute noise level of the wind farm may be no more than during the day, but it can be 10 to 20 decibels louder than the quieter nighttime ambient sound levels. This detail has important implications for sleep disruption. So at this point, we've talked a few times about sleep disruption in this excerpt, so we're going to underline that. Third, wind turbines generate lower frequency of sound than traffic. These lower frequencies tend to be judged as more annoying than higher frequencies and are more likely to travel through walls and windows. Infrasound, or sound frequency lower than 20 megahertz, inaudible to the human ear, has been associated in some studies with symptoms including fatigue, sleeplessness, and irritability, as well as with changes to the physiology of the inner ear that have poorly understood implications. So quite a bit here. And I'm just going to put a minus sign up at the top to let me know that this is kind of negative. And it's really going to be about the health effects that come from being too close to wind turbine, or noise pollution would be another thing that I could put. Okay. Our next source, Blowin' in the Wind, Texas Ranchers Turn to Turbines. And it says this comes from an article in a magazine that features articles on environmental issues. In sun-seared West Texas, oil and gas producers have driven the regional economy since the mid-1920s. Now there's a new player in town, electricity generating wind turbines. The turbines are sprouting by the hundreds on the low mesas that dot the desert landscape. Wind turbines came to the small West Texas town of McCamey with the millennium. Construction began in 2000 and the first machines came online in 2001. Florida Power and Light, FPL, now runs 688 area turbines. There are 3 things you're going to have to find, says Neil James, production manager for the FPL wind operations around McCamey. That's the wind, the transmission lines, and the land. The McCamey area is very abundant in those 3 things. McCamey, population 1,600, has always been blessed with petroleum resources, but the oil business boom and bust cycles have taken their toll. Oil production in Upton County dropped almost 25% from 1972, when it was 12.5 million barrels, to 1999, 9.4 million barrels. Wind power has restored McCamey's economy, so that's interesting. One of the things to consider is if you're putting it somewhere where it's actually going to benefit the economy. Let's put a $sign there. It now bills itself as the wind energy capital of Texas. It was dying there for a little bit, admits Alicia Sanchez, who heads McCamey's Economic Development Office. Now taxes have increased 30% from 2004 to 2007. All we see is positive. Texans apparently agree. An FPL Commission study released earlier this year said 93% support further development of wind energy in the state. Federal tax credits, coupled with a Texas mandate requiring that a percentage of electricity come from green power producers, have spurred development. Rick Doan manages rights-of-way and surface lands leasing for the state's Permanent University Fund, which supports the University of Texas and other Texas institutions, and also owns 2.1 million acres, chiefly in West Texas. Doan says wind turbine leases and oil and gas leases often involve the same land. The electric companies didn't see any problems with oil rigs, he says. They're towers, but they're only up for a month or 2 unless it's a very deep well. So that's interesting. If we underline this part here. So wind power doesn't negatively affect oil/gas. So you can use the same land. It's a way of capitalizing on that resource. Texas's other historic industry, ranching, loves the turbines. Rancher Ernest Woodward said he can't imagine any harm coming to his livestock from nearby turbines. Windmills are very clean, Woodward said. There's nothing that's harmful to the environment that I know of. Bird kills, he says, are not a problem because West Texas fowl have little problem avoiding the slow-moving 20 revolutions per minute turbine blades. For some ranchers, wind turbines bring with them an economic incentive that oil and gas do not. Let's go ahead and box that. Wind power is a surface activity, Doan says. With oil and gas, the minerals are underneath, and a lot of ranchers don't own the mineral rights. Many of them sold off the minerals in order to get enough money to retain the surface rights when times were tough. Woodward, who has both wind leases and oil leases on his ranch between McCamey and Fort Stockton, says there's room enough for both. There are 243 of the big wind turbines turning on Woodward Mesa. He gets a 6 to 8% royalty payment on the power the turbines make. We're just living off the land and whatever else we can do. We're glad to have them, he says. Okay, so this is more positively biased. It's looking at how we have the economic benefits of wind power, okay? And it benefits both the individual, the rancher, and the community as well. Source E comes from a recent scholarly book. Without question, the gargantuan wind turbines installed in today's commercial wind farms can materially alter a landscape's appearance. Modern utility-scale wind turbines commonly exceed 400 feet in height, towering well above any other buildings or structures in their vicinities, and tall enough to be seen from several miles away. Even in rural areas where population densities are relatively low, turbines can impose significant costs by disrupting territorial views for local residents who may have grown attached to an area's existing natural backdrop. So let's go ahead, disrupting views. The presence of turbines continues into the night when turbine safety lighting, often required under federal aviation laws, flashes across an otherwise pristine evening sky. So we're just going to write light pollution as well. So we had the noise pollution earlier, now we have light pollution. Unfortunately, only so much can be done to disguise commercial wind turbines from view. Because the colors naturally occurring in the sky and on land tend to change with the seasons and time of day, it is often impossible to successfully camouflage turbines with paint such that they blend in with their surroundings. Painting designs on turbines or painting them multiple colors tends to only make them more distracting, and painting them gray can make them seem dirty or associated with an industrial, urban, or military character. Consequently, most commercial wind turbines are painted white, a color choice based partly on a belief that bright white turbines convey a positive image and are associated with cleanliness. Installing smaller, shorter turbines to make them less conspicuous to neighbors is also rarely a viable option. The energy productivity of natural wind tends to increase significantly with altitude, so turbines are purposely designed to stand high above the ground to capture those more productive wind currents. By towering well above the Earth's surface, modern commercial wind turbines also avoid turbulence from nearby buildings and trees that might otherwise diminish their productivity. And the sheer size of a commercial wind turbine's rotor, which directly affects its generating capacity, requires that the turbine be mounted upon a tall tower. So here we're just going to paraphrase very tall slash, you could put imposing, maybe the word you want is distracting. Really up to you what diction you use. Unable to camouflage or shrink the size of utility scale wind turbines, wind energy developers must often find ways to assuage locals' concerns about the potential visual impacts of these enormous devices. Developers' ability to do so depends in part on local residents' subjective views about the attractiveness of the turbines themselves. Indeed, wind turbines are no different from any other structure in that their beauty or ugliness ultimately rests in the eye of their beholder. Some scholars have suggested that wind farms could and should be more commonly viewed as works of art. Citing the widespread depiction of windmills in notable 17th century Dutch paintings and the large-scale environmental art projects of famous artists such as Christo Javovic, they argue that commercial wind energy projects should be perceived as artistic creations rather than industrial blight. Okay, so for this one, I'm actually going to put a negative sign up here because we're looking at how wind turbines affect, that's a T, you can't see the cross, affect landscape. And for a lot of people, that would be a negative effect, although there is this counter down here that you should look at it as an artistic creation and embrace the artistry. The very last source provides us with a chart. It's taken from a blog on a news site that examines the mathematics behind common events, and the event here has to do with the source of electricity from wind turbines. And if you look, here we have the percent of energy input retained when converting fuel to electricity. We go from least efficient to most efficient. And so we do see that wind turbines appear to be the most efficient. But if we look down here, the cost to produce 1 megawatt of electricity, we see that wind turbines are not necessarily the cheapest, okay? So a little bit of an issue here. I think I'm gonna go ahead and paraphrase this. Wind turbines equal, we'll say relatively low cost, right? It's fourth on the list. So low cost, high efficiency. Okay, and that takes us through the sources, our annotating, and now we have to start thinking back to the actual prompt. What are some of the important factors that an individual or agency should consider when deciding whether to establish a wind farm? And some of the things that we thought about was the money, the economic impact. We thought about the reception, location, things like that. I think the 3 ideas that I want to focus on, and I always like to come up with 3, would probably have to be the location, where are we putting it and why, the environmental impact, which was not something that I had come up with prior to reading, but as I went through the sources, I started to learn more and more about the environmental impact. And then also the local impact, which would be more the immediate communities. So if I wanted to put those ideas together into a working thesis, I would need to put it something like the most important factors, and I like to borrow the verbiage from the prompt, the most important factors and individual or agency. I would say or, I don't like to do slashes in writing, I think it degrades, but again, this is a working thesis, it's a skeleton outline, so that's why I can use abbreviations and shorthand there. So individual or agency should consider when deciding whether to establish a wind farm are location, environmental impact, and local impact. So again, in a working thesis, sometimes I'm going to have doubles, right? So I say location, environmental impact, and local impact, and that's exactly what I wrote here. But maybe I want to change this to local reception or, you know, something like that, or consequences, benefits, something like that. If I don't want to do that, if I want to just be direct, it's okay to have this right here, okay? I might even change it to say, when deciding whether to establish a wind farm, are the location of the wind farm and the environmental and local impact that will result from the wind farm. There's plenty of way that you can straighten that out when you actually write your essay. But in a skeleton outline, you are trying to jot down your ideas to give you direction within that 15-minute time frame of reading, annotating, and planning so that you can get into the actual writing of your essay. Now, I do like to do the 3-paragraph model. Body paragraph number 1 is going to be about location. And I'm now asserting that if you're going to establish a wind farm or you're thinking about it, then you need to consider the location. Things that you need to consider: where are we going to put it? Is it going to be in a community? Is it going to be someplace remote? Okay. Is it going to cause any visual or noise issues for residents? Is it going to be on oil, gas land so that you can capitalize on the land, right? You don't need to take an entire, you know, like, I don't know, 2,000 acre piece of land, and of the 2,000 acres, maybe 1,000 is for gas, 500 is for oil, and then the remaining 500 is for wind farms. You can actually utilize the entire 2,000 acres altogether, okay? So one of the things that we'd want to put down here would be our potential sources. So let's switch colors so we can see. When we do where, actually we can use the image from source A, okay, because it's remote. It seems to be far away from any homes or residences, things like that. If we're going to do the oil and gas, we're going to talk about the McCamey West, Texas, and that actually comes from source D. And then the visual or the noise, I don't know, I've listed it there, but I might actually want to save that for either environmental or local impact. We'll see. So for now, on my skeleton outline, I'll put a question mark there, because sometimes we jot ideas down and then we realize maybe I'd rather put that in a different paragraph. So body paragraph 2 is going to be about the environment and the environmental impact. We're going to have to consider when we're deciding whether or not will wind farms replace, we'll call it dirty energy for now. Because remember, wind farms are clean. And this is going to come from source B. And that would be the major source for this. And there's actually a lot that we can explore with that. One of the things that you might want to do here, harmful emissions, gas etc. But then the other thing that we might want to do would be to look at how from source B also, it can cause land erosion, remember, and hazard to birds, question mark. These are all from source B. Okay, so your second body paragraph is going to be source B heavy. Okay, so now we need to go to our body paragraph number 3, which is going to be the local impact. Now, we need to have some sort of concession. We need to acknowledge that there's going to be conflicting viewpoints that maybe someone says it's worth it after all. I would highly recommend with a prompt like this one, anytime you're asked to consider the factors that an agency or an individual would have to look at before they do whatever it is that's being presented to you. One idea to do would be to actually include in your body paragraphs a sentence that counters, okay? So let me give you an example of what that would look like. Here, in a sentence that counters the hazard to birds, you would get that counter from source D. And source D, I'm pretty sure it's D. Let me look back for just a moment. We will look together. Yes, it is source D right here. Bird kills are not a problem. So if I'm saying in my argument number 2, hey, we need to consider that, you know, it could be hazardous to birds and things like that. Although this is not always a concern for people who believe that the bird kills won't be a problem because turbines move so slowly. Do you see how I could embed a bit of a counter to a statement that I'm asserting here? Okay, the one thing that you have to remember, and I'm certain that you've been practicing this with your AP teachers and your AP classes, you don't want to lose focus of the main idea of your paragraph. So if you're arguing we have to consider environmental concerns, keep that so that you are saying as the main focus of this paragraph, an agency would need to consider, this is an example of a topic sentence, an agency would need to consider whether or not establishing a wind farm would have a detrimental impact on the environment. For some, wind farms actually seem more appealing because they replace dirty energy sources such as coal, nuclear power, or gas. In fact, and this is where I'd have source B, you know, blah, 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 states that one of the greatest appeals of wind farming is that it is both clean and renewable. And I would kind of go on with this. If a wind farm is in fact established, then here I would quote from B again. I would say, if it's in an arid desert climate, that the wind farmers would have to make sure that they don't dig so deeply that they cause land erosion. Another environmental concern that should be addressed is whether or not the establishment of a wind farm would pose any sort of hazardous threat to the natural flora and fauna of an area. For example, many groups argue that wind farming can be hazardous to birds. Yet wind farmers in McCamey, Texas note that bird kills are not necessarily a concern for them because turbines move slowly. Okay. You just heard me kind of speak my way through what a body paragraph for environment would look like. And you heard me speak my way through how I would embed this counter statement to note that there are opposing viewpoints, okay? What you did not hear me do was come back with the rebuttal and then the concluding sentence for that paragraph. So just make sure that you know when you point out that there are opposing viewpoints, you want to make sure you are reaffirming yours with that rebuttal, and then you have that concluding sentence of your paragraph that reinforms your stance. Okay, thank you for going with me on that detour. Let's look just briefly at the local impact, the things that we might want to cover here. Do wind farms or wind turbines, we'll put wind farms, affect human health? And that, of course, would come from source C. I'm not going to change colors here. And also, could wind farms increase local economy? And that would be a yes if you are citing from source D, but again, an embedded counterclaim here, let me change colors just so that we follow along. If I came here, a counter argument, it might improve local economies at the expense of others. So let's just really briefly, maybe down here in New Mexico, That's not really a great drawing of New Mexico, so my apologies. You have windmills. Also, all those memes that you ever see about teachers who can't draw right here. So we have a wind farm in New Mexico, which means that the Santa Fe economy improves. We're gathering new taxes. It's breathing new life into this community. But now, all the way over here in West Virginia, we're not relying on coal energy anymore. There's my coal. And so their economy decreases. So this would be the counter argument here. It's possible and probable that establishing a wind farm is going to bolster a local economy, but will it be at the expense of other economies that depend on so-called dirty sources of energy or electricity to maintain their livelihoods? Okay, something like that. Okay. So you see how we've gone through the sources, we've annotated them, we've established a skeleton outline, we've got our ideas, we are ready to write. Make sure that you are embedding these sources to support your claims. And as always, I tell you, the AP says to use at least 3, try to go for 4. A, B, C, and D. And you're going to find, see how I have an extra D and I have an extra B? You're going to find each time that you plan your synthesis paper that there are usually at least 4 sources that work across your body paragraphs. Okay? All right. Good luck. Bye-bye.